Good morning, everybody. My name is Dennis Levin, and I'm a retired pastor at Queen Street United Methodist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class, which is not meeting today because there's about 10 inches of snow on the ground, and folks down here don't get around 10 inches of snow on the ground. So we're going to do a video, an introduction to the book of Ruth. So what is it about Ruth? Ruth is a book in our Bible that is positioned after the book of Judges and before you get to 1 Samuel. It's in the Christian Bible and in the Septuagint, which is the Greek Bible. That's where it's positioned. In the Hebrew Bible, it is positioned towards the back in a lesser domain called the writings, where you find things like the book of Daniel and Jonah and some others. But it has the book of Ruth is doesn't carry the same weight as what you have in the Pentateuch. So anyway, but why is it positioned there? Well, the book of Ruth is positioned in between Judges and 1 Samuel because, first of all, one of the first verses in Ruth makes reference to that this is in the time of the Judges. And it gives an indication that it's kind of toward the close of the time of the Judges. And so we're, from a timeline perspective, it's betwixt and between. So that's why in the Christian Bible and the Septuagint, it's positioned where it is, just from a timeline feature. Also, the book of Ruth is a way of kind of hinting that down the line from Ruth is going to be a monarch, namely David. And for us, because David's in that lineage, then Joseph was in that lineage, then Jesus was in that lineage by adoption. And so that's where we get the throne of David associated with Jesus. But the interesting thing about this is that Ruth is not Jewish. She is a Moabite. And so we have a story that brings together cultures that typically would hate each other, and to form something new, something good for the nation. And it's in that respect, it is kind of a counterpoint to the book of Nehemiah, for instance, when the people came back from captivity and they divorced their Gentile wives. The book of Ruth is an indication that that probably was not necessarily what God had in mind, that God can use a mixture of cultures, even Jewish and Gentile. There are several features to understand about the book of Ruth, too. There's the story of Naomi, who is Ruth's mother-in-law, a life filled with tragedy, and as we see, a hopeless situation turn into a situation that has hope in it. We go through life's tragedies, and they leave their mark. Sometimes, if we succumb to them, then they devastate our lives and they ruin our lives. And it would seem that this is what was going to happen to Naomi. She was a woman full of despair, but God still had his eye on Naomi, and which is interesting because women didn't have a very high status, and this story about women primarily shows that God is not restricted to working with the dominant gender in the Old Testament, even though it's a very patriarchal society. You can see how God is not devoid of compassion or working through women, despite their status in that society. So we have a story where you have an Israelite family that moves from Judah and Bethlehem to Moab, which is basically what we would consider like Saudi Arabia, and because of a famine, and all the men die, and then the women are left. So it's Naomi and her two Moabite daughters-in-law One of them opts to stay, and the other one decides to go back with Naomi and to adopt Naomi's religion. Understand that Naomi tries to dissuade her from coming, and this is an indication that that in the Jewish culture is not a culture that desires proselyting people into their culture. That it's very ethnically based, and Naomi thinks that her daughters-in-law would probably fare better in their home country than they would going to a land where they would be absolutely considered to be foreigners and devoid of rights, basically, for a lot of reasons. So the fact that Ruth is willing to stay with Naomi shows that there's a great deal of love between these two women, and that loyalty between them. And this loyalty is a feature that God blesses and recognizes. So, the migration back to Bethlehem um, shows that a person, if they want to, can choose to become part of the Jewish community. But the Jewish community has no interest in inviting other people into the community. If you want to join, that's wonderful. We have a way of doing that, but that's not something that we're out to do. We're not out to proselyte anybody, to change them, or to take them away from whatever faith they have. That's their business. The Jews are the chosen people of God, and that's, we're just content that we stay that way. But we're going to find, as the story transpires, that that barrier is not something that is fixed, and that God recognizes the intention of the heart more than God recognizes a person's ethnicity. This is the point in Romans that Paul was trying to make, that people are the chosen people of God because they choose God, and that it's a matter of faith, that Abraham's transition to becoming the founder, the patriarch of Judaism, was a choice that he made based on God's offer. And what's happening here is that there's an offer. She can come with Naomi, but it's a choice that she makes, and God recognizes choices that people make. This is indicative also of the way that Jesus interacted with Gentiles by and large, that Jesus recognizes the faith in a Gentile, that Jesus recognizes that even though someone is in a culture that is not only estranged from, but also hostile to the Jewish community, that a person can be recognized for their faith, and that it is possible for a person from that community to also recognize the godliness and the legitimacy of Jesus. So what we have here is a cross-cultural thing. Now, understand that a person's lineage from their mother is what determines whether or not they are Jewish. So if David's lineage derives from Ruth, then technically there would be some question about whether or not David was actually Jewish. You have a couple of people back in his background, like Rahab, the prostitute from Jericho, and then you have Ruth, and so there are a couple of hiccups in his lineage that indicate that there's a mixed blood in his background. This this is something also that I think affects the monarchy of David, that David fought the Philistines. David fought other cultures as a Jew, but you'll also see in the story of David that he wasn't always hostile to other cultures, that he was an opportunist. and whenever there was an opportunity to get along with or to use another culture, he was very willing to do it. And some of that may come from his own background. The story also has another main character, and that's Boaz. We're going to see that Boaz is a fine gentleman and a wealthy one, and that he's attracted to Ruth, but there are restraints. She is a foreigner. He kind of looks out for her, but there's kind of this dance that goes on between them. That he has tremendous compassion for her and for Naomi, and he sees that well, she was part of the family kind of thing, and but I'm not going to give away the kicker on this thing, but that the final decision that he makes to accept Ruth and take her totally under his wing is kind of intricate. Anyway, I wanted to give you an introduction to the Book of Ruth. It's one that is read in Jewish communities sometime around their Pentecost, after Passover. And it's a refreshing narrative that shows that there can be a good, open working relationship between cultures, and that maybe Judaism is not necessarily as exclusive as it's made out to be in other parts of the Bible. But anyway, just want you to know that hopefully next week we'll be back in church and we'll start with chapter 1 of Ruth. In the meantime, our worship is also online today, and you may want to check it out at 11 o'clock. But this has just been a little taste of what the Book of Ruth is about. Come join us for worship at 11 o'clock, and God bless you, and hope the confinement of the snow doesn't ruin your day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.